Now in this lecture, I will walk you through the 9 key steps you need to follow in order to develop the schedule model in your project. So this lecture offers a general overview of the essential elements for developing a sound schedule model. Now, a schedule model provides a useful detailed plan that can be used by the project manager and the project team to assist in completing the project successfully. So the schedule model of your project is the detailed plan that the project management team, the project manager, and even the stakeholders will use in order to complete the project activities successfully. The project team develops the schedule model as a tool that is in alignment with the schedule management plan. Definitely, the schedule model should be aligned to the approach and the tool we documented in the schedule management plan. The schedule model captures the team's vision of how the project will be performed and how the project is expected to react to changes over time. The project team modifies the schedule model appropriately to reflect changes throughout the project life cycle. So it's a dynamic version. We will capture a snapshot at the beginning of the project as the schedule model baseline. However, this document will be updated continuously throughout the project life cycle. Now, the schedule model describes, first of all, the what is the work to be done in the project, who, what, and when the resources required to do the work, and when these resources will be needed to do the work, the activity durations, how long, based on resources availability and the productivity rates of the resources, and the optimum activity sequence based on logical relationships between schedule activities, resources availability, and calendars. All these are the key items that should appear in a well-developed schedule model. The development of a good schedule model is achieved through the consistent application of sound practices. Experience gained over time helps to select appropriate responses to the design requirements for the schedule model. So we need to develop a good schedule model that will facilitate the success of the project and will assist the project management team in monitoring the project execution and the project progress. Now, what are the key steps of developing the schedule model? The first step is defining the key milestones in the project. And a milestone, as identified earlier, is a significant event in the project with zero duration. It has no resources assigned. It is used as a benchmark to measure progress and may also reflect the start and finish points of various project events. So this is the milestone. It's a significant event with no duration, with no resources assigned, and it is only used for reporting purposes as a benchmark to measure the project progress. Generally, a milestone represents the start or completion of a portion or deliverable of the project. It may also be associated with external constraints, such as the delivery of specific required approvals or deliverables. So if we are managing an infrastructure project and we want to make sure that we will finish the excavation works for the foundation by end of April 23. So a milestone should be there at the end of April 23 under the name of excavation works completed. This is an example of a milestone. It has no resources, it has zero duration. There are activities previously that lead to this milestone completion. The project contains a list of milestones initially developed when the schedule model is created. They may have originated from the customer, team members, or other stakeholders. As the schedule model is developed, additional milestones are added as needed. It's an iterative process. Whenever a new milestone appears and it's essential to have it, to monitor it, you need to add it to the milestones list. Now, after completing the milestones list, we need to define the project activities as part of the defined activities process, which we covered earlier in the schedule management plan knowledge area. So create the list of activities that need to be performed in order to complete the project, and the list of activities should be created based on the work breakdown structure and elaborated by the team responsible for the execution of the work. These activities should represent the expected sequence of the activities and represent the manner of how the work in the project will occur. So as an outcome of this step, we need to have a list of all the project activities. Those project activities were decomposed from the work packages that exist in the work breakdown structure. An activity is a measurable and discrete element or block of work that is tangible element of the project scope. So each activity should produce something that is part of the project scope. It might be a deliverable itself or part of the deliverable. Activities are specific actions that are performed to produce the project deliverables. The characteristics of a well-defined activity include: we need to have the activity owner. Multiple resources may be required to accomplish an activity. However, there should be one single person who is responsible and accountable for the activity performance. That individual should also report progress on this activity. So we might have different resources who are responsible for an activity to be executed. However, there should be one accountable person, one person known as the activity owner, and he or she is responsible to provide us with the updates on the execution of this activity. The activity description. Activities describe the work that needs to be accomplished. As such, the description for each activity starts with a verb and contains a unique specific object. Although poor wall may be descriptive of a task, the activity description needs to be more specific, describing exactly what we will be doing in this activity. Another attribute is the continuity of work activity. The work represented by an activity once started should be capable of proceeding to completion without interruption. When the work on an activity is suspended or delayed, it's often beneficial for the activity to be split into 2 or more activities at natural break points. So if you have an activity, for example, that is planned to start in May 23 and it will be hold on in August for 2 months and it will be returned back to work in October, this is not a good practice. It's better to split this activity into 2 activities. The activity duration is an important attribute. Typically, an activity's duration should be less than 2 times the update cycle, and this is a question I had in my PMI-SP exam. What's the ideal update cycle duration? So again, an activity duration should be less than 2 times the update cycle. If we are updating our project on weekly basis, so double this week will be 2 weeks. So an activity duration should always be less than 2 weeks. This is an important rule of thumb. This allows the reporting of the start and finish of an activity within 1 or 2 update cycles, enabling management to focus on performance and corrective actions if needed. Exceptions to this general rule are continuous activities, some of which are defined below. So what are the continuous activities? First of all, we have the summary activity, and a summary activity is a single representation of activities aggregated by common attributes within the schedule model and can be created in a number of ways. If you are working in the project management industry or if you worked as a scheduler earlier, you should be aware of what is a summary activity in the Gantt chart or in the project plan. Now, the first example of a summary activity is when the activity describes in broad terms the effort to be performed and the project does not have enough information to break it down into greater detail or does not desire to track it at a lower level of detail. So if, for example, this activity bore a 2-mile long tunnel, we don't have enough information to break down this activity, or we don't want to track this activity throughout the project execution on more details level, so we can use the summary activity. This is the first example. The second method is when the activities are automatically rolled up to create a summary of all the similar activities as shown in figure below. In this example, the activities under group A, so here is group A, and the activities under group B, we have 3 activities under group B and 3 activities under group A, are summarized by a single bar shown above the activities. Here is the single bar showing the group activities A, and here is another single bar showing the group activities B. This is the summary activity. So they are summarized by a single bar shown above the activities to reflect what is shown under that bar and coded to the appropriate group. This is another example of the summary activity. Note that the start and finish dates reflect the early start date and the early finish date and not the late dates. So the start and finish of a summary activity represents only the early start and the early finish, not the late figures. Also, the duration reflected on the summary bar matches the elapsed time from the start to finish of the group of activities. So you can see, for example, for summary activity group A, it starts with the start of the first activity and it is completed with the finish of the last activity. A third example of a summary activity is an activity that can take longer than 2 or 3 update periods, such as a procurement activity performed by someone outside the project and it's expected on the site at a particular date. The status of the work effort cannot be incorporated in the schedule other than accounting for time until the event occurs. So here is an example of this type where the summary activity can take longer than 2 or 3 update cycles, like the procurement activity shown here, fabrication and delivery of a special component. Another type of those activities is the level of effort, and I got one question in my PMI-SP exam about this type. A level of effort activity, or LOE, is incorporated into the schedule to track, account for, and spread resources over a period of time. However, this does not accomplish a discrete, specific deliverable product. So, there is no product or no deliverable that will be produced at the end of the level of effort activity. It will not affect the schedule. It will not affect the critical path. It is only there to track something or to monitor the spread of resources over a period of time. One example of this is accounting for project hours associated with administrative support. In this case, the activity duration should reflect the anticipated time for this activity. However, this activity in the example will not produce a specific deliverable in the project. Generally, level of effort activities should not appear on the project critical path, and it should not drive the project end date. There will be no impact of the level of effort activities either on the critical path or on the project completion date or duration. Care needs to be given to the level of effort activities, because when they are given static durations equal to the length of the entire project, they should never end up on or drive the critical path of the project. So here is an example of a level of effort activity. It is not part of the critical path and it will not drive the project end date. By their very nature of supporting detailed work activities, level of efforts cannot drive the project duration and cannot be critical. This is very important for the level of effort activities. They are supportive in nature. It is good practice to define the level of effort activities in such a way that they will take their duration from the detailed activities that they will support. So level of effort activities will never be in the critical path, will never add duration to the project completion date. Another type is the hammock activity. A hammock activity is a bridging activity that uses and is confined by a start-to-start and finish-to-finish relationships to supporting activities. So hammock activities are only confined with 2 types of logical relationships, a start-to-start or finish-to-finish. A level of effort activity is unlike a hammock activity because the level of effort may have many types of relationships associated with them. So here is an example of a hammock activity that is linked with a start-to-start relationship and a finish-to-finish relationship. At the same time, it's only a supporting activity. This is the third exception. Now, the third step of the schedule model creation is sequencing the project activities. The sequencing of activities and milestones together with logic is the foundation of any schedule model. So after defining the project milestones and project activities, it's very important to link between these activities at least with one predecessor activity and one successor activity or milestone. This is the foundation of any well-defined or well-developed schedule model. The method of connection is defined as a relationship between 2 activities. Every activity and milestone except the first milestone in the project and the last milestone or activity in the project should be connected to at least one predecessor, which is the previous activity, and one successor activity, which is the following one. The only activities or milestones that can be without a predecessor or without a successor is the first milestone, because there will be nothing before this milestone. It's the first activity on the project or milestone, so there will be no predecessor. And the last one because it is the last one in the project, so there will be no successor activity. With the exception of the start milestone, a preceding activity needs to finish or start prior to any activity starting, and in turn that activity should be totally or partially completed to allow another activity to start. So with the exception of the first and last milestone or activity, every activity in the project schedule model should be linked to a predecessor and to a successor. Typically, each predecessor activity finishes prior to the start of its successor activity, and this is the most popular or the most commonly used logical relationship known as the finish to start relationship, FS relationship. The predecessor should finish before the successor can start. Sometimes it's necessary to overlap activities, and in this case, an option may be selected to use a start to start relationship, a finish to finish, or a start to finish relationship. And shortly I will show you examples. So this figure provides examples of the 4 logical relationships in a critical path method approach, either a finish to start, a finish to finish, a start to start, or a start to finish. This is the most commonly used one, and this is rarely found, the start to finish. So most relationships in a detailed schedule model will be a finish to start relationship. Finish to start relationships results in the simplest and least complicated calculations for the project schedule model. When other types of relationships are used, they should be used sparingly and with an understanding of how the relationships have been implemented in the scheduling tool or the scheduling software. Ideally, the sequence of all activities is configured so that the start of every activity has a logical relationship from a predecessor, and the finish of every activity should have a logical relationship with its successor. So here is a finish to start relationship between activities X and Y. In this example, activity X must be complete before activity Y can begin. This is the simplest relationship. Here is a finish to finish relationship between activities X and Y, and in this example, activity X must be complete before activity Y can finish. So it's a finish to finish relationship. A start to start relationship, in this example, activity Y can start only after activity X has started. And this is the most rarely used logical relationship, a start to finish. In this example, activity Y cannot complete, cannot finish until activity X has started. This is a start to finish relationship. So in the sequencing activities step, we need to assign a logical relationship for each activity. The fourth step is determining the resources for each activity. Estimate activity resources, which we covered earlier as part of the schedule management knowledge area, is the process for determining the type and quantities of material, labor, equipment, or infrastructure required to perform each activity in the project. So we need to determine the required resources to execute this activity, either physical, human, or financial resources. When a project is constrained in terms of resources and the project duration could be impacted, resources should be incorporated into the schedule model. The hours needed for a senior designer to accomplish the activity versus a junior designer to perform the same activity could be considerably different, thus impacting the duration and quality of activity outputs and ultimately the cost of the project. The fifth step of the schedule model creation is determining the duration for each activity. After knowing the required resources for this activity, we can determine the exact duration each activity will take in our schedule model. The duration is an estimate of the working time necessary to accomplish the work represented by the activity. In the case of team resources, the number of resources that are expected to be available to accomplish an activity, together with the standard or expected productivity of those resources, will often determine the activity's duration. So in order to determine the duration of an activity, we need to be aware of the level of effort required to execute this activity, the number of resources, and their productivity rates. Factors influencing the duration are the type or skill level of the resources available to undertake the work, resource calendars, the risk associated with the work, and the intrinsic nature of the work. Some activities, like for example a 24-hour stress test, take a set of amount of time to complete regardless of the resource allocation. So some activities are not efforts based, they are duration based, like having a test that should be conducted for 24 hours. So this test duration is 24 hours, regardless of the number of resources assigned for this test. Step number 6 is analyzing the schedule output, and we will cover the schedule model analysis tools and techniques in one of the following lectures in this section. But here, as a step, once completed, the schedule model contains a set of unique activities that have varying durations and that are connected by defined logical relationships. The schedule model provides the project team with information on what needs to be accomplished and the sequence required to accomplish the project deliverables. The scheduling function always requires three distinct processes for time analysis, and it might require a fourth process when resource smoothing or leveling is being used in the schedule model, and we covered the resource leveling or smoothing techniques earlier in this course. The discrete steps are, first of all, assign a start date to the start milestone. So you need to assign a start date for the first milestone in the project, which is usually the start date of the project. Then moving throughout the network from activity to activity, usually from left to right. This is called the forward pass. And in sequence defined by logical relationships. Assign start and finish dates for each activity and milestone as determined by the defined durations. And this is known as the forward pass. The start and finish dates for each activity are known as the early start and early finish dates. And we usually determine these early figures for each activity through conducting a forward pass from the left to the right, as explained earlier in the critical path method. When the analysis reaches the end of the schedule model, the software determines the earliest possible finish date for the project and the shortest project duration based on the activity's estimated durations and logical relationships as defined. The second step is to assign a finish date to the last milestone or activity in the project. So assign a finish date to the end milestone. This could be the same date as the one calculated by the forward pass, or a different date that was applied as a constraint due to contractual requirements, etc. The analysis process then works back through the network from right to left until it arrives back at the start milestone, and this is known as the backward pass, and we will be able to determine the late finish and the late start for each activity in the project. So this is called the backward pass, moving from right to left, from the last milestone to the first milestone in the project, and establishes the late start and late finish dates for each activity and milestone. The late start and late finish dates represent the latest dates that each task can start and finish without causing a delay in the finish date of the project. The third step is in analyzing the schedule model is calculating the float values by comparing the early and late dates of each activity in the project. And the float can be a total float or a free float. Total float, calculate total float by subtracting the early finish date from the late finish date, or the early start from the late start. So the idea is calculating the total float through the difference between the early and the late figure, either the early start with the late start or the early finish with the late finish. Negative total float means dates are not feasible without changing the plan. So whenever we have a negative total float, we need to take a corrective action in order to fix this negative total float. Or we might have the free float. Calculate the free float by subtracting the early finish date of the activity from the early start of the earliest of its successors. The free float is never a negative value. So the free float for each activity can be obtained by subtracting the early finish date of a specific activity from the early start of the earliest of its successors' activities. Why the earliest? Because we might have more than one successor activity if we have a path convergence. So this subtraction will provide you with the free float. The fourth step of the schedule model analysis is conducting the resource leveling if needed. Once the float values have been calculated, conduct resource leveling to minimize resource over allocations or reduce the fluctuations in resource demand. If this process is done automatically, determine the processes and algorithms that should be used. These steps, as part of the schedule model analysis step, can be all conducted through the scheduling software or tool you are using. The seventh step is approving the schedule model. The project team reviews the results of this initial scheduling process to determine the acceptability of the schedule model. This review should consider analyzed project end date, milestone completion dates, critical paths, the longest path for the project or as constraint driven, the total float values and resource requirements, and any resources ramp-up rates compared to the resources availabilities. All these are considerations of approving and reviewing the final schedule model. When alterations are required or requested by senior management or executives or the sponsor, the project team makes changes to the schedule logic, resource allocations, and or durations, and then reanalyzes the project schedule. The most common alteration required involves actions to reduce the overall duration of the schedule or adjustments to resource loading. The key techniques that we can use to compress the project schedule are the crashing and fast tracking. So for the crashing, I got one question in my PMI-SP exam. Crashing consists of adding resources to critical activities to shorten their durations or spending money in other ways to reduce the length of activities. So simply crashing treats the duration with the cost. We want to pay more, we want to add resources to invest more to shorten the duration of the activities. When adding resources to reduce activity duration, crashing only works for activities that are effort driven, not duration driven. Crashing should only be performed on activities on the critical path, and then only those activities that yield the most cost-effective result. So you might need to shorten the project duration with 20 days, and you have more than one option that you can crash and reduce this duration, so you should look for the option that is most cost-effective. Crashing typically increases the project costs by some factor. So the question I got in my PMI-SP exam was around which schedule compression technique will not sacrifice the project quality or the project scope. It was the crashing. Crashing will only increase the project cost. It will only increase or sacrifice the project budget. The other technique is the fast tracking, which consists of changing the logic by overlapping critical activities rather than working them strictly in sequence. Fast tracking will increase definitely the project risk. It will increase the risk of rework because activities are started before their initial predecessors are completed and possibly contributes to an increased number of change orders on contracted work. So we were planning for activities to be executed in sequence, and now we want to execute them in parallel. So definitely fast tracking will increase the risk of rework. Both of these actions may result in a trade-off of cost versus schedule dates. These iterations continue until an acceptable schedule model is developed, one that the key project stakeholders can agree is attainable and affordable. So we might conduct or use these techniques in order to shorten the project duration to develop a schedule model that will be accepted and approved by the key stakeholders. Step number 8 is baselining the schedule model. Once agreed upon and approved, the first instance of the schedule model will be known as the project baseline schedule model, and this is the version that is developmentally complete and approved for capture or copied for future reference. So why we need to baseline the schedule model? Because it will be our reference before we start the execution of the project. Having this baseline version will allow us to compare the project execution throughout the project lifecycle with our planned version in order to determine if there are any deviations. This baseline becomes the benchmark against which project performance is measured. It's generally accepted practice that every project has a baseline schedule model in place before the project work begins. So we need to have a schedule baseline. It's actually an instance of the schedule model, and this baseline will be our reference and our benchmark throughout the project execution. Once the baseline has been approved through formal procedures, reports are distributed in accordance with the project communications management plan, and changes to the baseline are monitored and controlled through the integrated change control process and through the configuration management. The last step is determining the schedule levels, and we have 5 important schedule levels which I want you to be aware of. Schedules can be created and defined at various levels. The project team specifies the rules for the relative granularity of the levels schedule activities in the overall project schedule model, and it should be noted that schedule levels can change depending on the approach we are using, the practitioner or the scheduler, and the organizational scheduling requirements. All these are factors you need to consider while you are determining which schedule level you will use. Each level will has a general purpose and the specific content for it. The first level is level 0 or project summary. This report is a single line representing the entire project, and it's often used for comparing projects in a program or portfolio. Audiences for this schedule level includes strategic partners, senior executives, portfolio or program managers, and operations managers. So for level 0 or project summary, the whole project will be represented in a single line. So if you ever looked at a program roadmap or a portfolio roadmap, you will see that each component or each project of this program or portfolio is being represented with a single line bar. This is the project summary or level 0. It is used for strategic partners, executives, and portfolio or program managers. The second level is level 1, which is the executive summary. This report is a high-level schedule that includes key milestones and summary activities by major phase, stage, or project being executed. It is typically represented in a bar chart format and may originate in a table of key elements or graphic, but it should ultimately be supported by a schedule that contains integrated work evolutions over the project lifecycle. The level 1 schedule will provide high-level information that will support decision makers. Audiences for this level will be the customers, senior executives, and general managers. These are the audiences of providing the executive summary schedule model. We have the level 2 or the management summary. This report is generally prepared to communicate the integration of work throughout the life cycle of a project. Level 2 schedules may reflect interfaces between key deliverables and project participants, which are required to complete the identified deliverables in the project. So this is a more detailed level, typically presented in bar chart format. Level 2 schedules provide high-level information that assists in the project decision-making process, and it's rolled up from more detailed schedule data. Audiences for this type of schedule includes customers, general managers, sponsors, and program or project managers. These are the audiences of the level 2 management summary schedule level. Level 3 is the publication schedule. This report is generally prepared to communicate the execution of the deliverables for each of the contracting parties. The schedule should reflect the interfaces between key work groups, disciplines, or crafts involved in the execution of the project in a bar chart or a critical path method network format. Level 3 schedules assist the team in identifying critical paths and activities that could potentially affect the outcome of a stage or phase of work. Level 3 schedules allow for mitigation and course correction while allowing for complete reporting period reports. Audiences for level 3 publication schedule are the program or project managers and the project supervisors. Level 4 or execution planning. This report is prepared to communicate the production of work evolutions at the deliverable level. The schedule level should reflect interfaces between key elements that drive the completion of activities, and typically level 4 execution planning is represented as a bar chart or as a network diagram. Level 4 schedules usually provide enough detail to plan and coordinate multidiscipline or craft activities. The period covered in this type of levels will be between 1 week to 1 month, supporting the milestones and durations represented in level 3 schedule. The basis of the level 4 schedule is the layouts defined in a database of work packages of the work breakdown structure, or the lists, or the detailed diagramming methods where detailed steps, deliverables, and actions can be communicated over the life of the scheduled items. Audiences for this type of schedule include project managers and supervisors responsible for accomplishing the activities. And the last level will be the detailed planning level, which is the most detailed schedule level. This report is prepared to communicate task requirements for completing activities that are identified in the detailed schedule. A level 5 schedule is usually considered a working schedule that reflects hourly, daily, or even weekly work requirements. Level 5 schedules are usually prepared 1 day or 1 week in advance, and the period covered is usually 1 day to 1 week, because it's very detailed, supporting the milestones and durations represented in the level 3 or 4 schedules. Typically, level 5 schedules are presented in an activity listing format. It's the most texty format of the 5 levels or the 6 levels, without time-scaled graphical representations of work to be accomplished. And the level 5 schedules are used to plan the schedule use of resources for each task. Audiences include supervisors, team members responsible for performing the work. So usually level 5 is presented to the working teams.